everyone, welcome back to the Sports Psych Show. Thanks so much for joining me today. Now, in this episode, I'm delighted to be speaking with Mark Bennett. Mark, welcome to the Sports Psych Show.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, we've been talking for some time about getting you on, and I've been a huge fan of your work. I've listened to you on lots of other podcasts. I feel very familiar with your work, and I know that a lot of people who are tuning in will know of you, know of your work, may have worked with you. There may even be some people out there, Mark, who don't know you. For those people, and just for all of us anyway, why don't you tell us who you are, what you do, how you've come to get to where you are today?
So I developed performance development systems. So it's been over 28 years now of just going through a self-discovery journey and coming across obstacles on the route to come up with a system that's quite organic, that just helps coaches, managers, teachers to better understand themselves and better understand how they influence and get the best out of the people around them in a very practitioner kind of way. So that's kind of the short version, but my background was I joined the military in 83, thinking everyone would be highly fit and motivated, and realised most weren't. So I got into a bit of trouble, disengaged, and then I met a commando force guy. I went down to the commando course, loved it, and became a physical training instructor. But in the early 90s, I started to realise that when I thought I was great at developing people, I realised I was quite useless. And I wasn't really developing anyone. The people that already had the mental robustness and the engagement and that toughness and all those internal qualities you would see in a great sports person, great businessman, they were missing. So we weren't developing them. Anyone that had them would keep up and pass. And the people that didn't have them basically failed. So that was early 90s. So when I realised I was terrible, when I thought I was great, I decided to either change my job or change the way I did it. So it went on a very uncomfortable learning of discovery, and along that journey I started to work with pro sports, and I got to a point now where I thought I know I can now do it, but then I realized in other situations it's no good if I can just do it and then the coaches and the players go away and then they regress. I need to find a way to get other coaches and players to better understand so they can do it without me being there. So that took another 6-8 years. So it's been a long journey. The fundamentals have never really changed from, I'd say in the last 20 years. The last 5-10 years I've been able to fine-tune some applicational tools just to make it easier for coaches, managers, teachers to better understand it and take it away. But that's the shorter version. It's about 30 sports now. Do a lot of work more in the States, from grassroots all the way up to Olympic level, national teams, pro teams, in any sport, and also going to schools to help disruptive, disengaged kids through supporting the teachers and the mentors.
Really interesting background, Mark. And before we start to discuss the specific tools and philosophies that you use with coaches and players in these different sports, just going back to the early years, you said you reached a point where you realised that you weren't good enough in what you were doing. You weren't developing people in a way that helped them progress and perform. I think my question to you there is, did that just come naturally? Were you at ease with that? Did you wake up one day and go, you know what, I'm just not good enough here, and you were comfortable with that notion? Or did you rebel against that a little bit? Did you have, I suppose the term we would use in psychology is cognitive dissonance, feeling really uncomfortable with that notion? Did you have to fight with yourself for a little bit to make the change?
No, it was an instant, oh my God moment. It's a bit like, when you think you're fine, then you realise there's a big tarantula on your shoulder. It's quite instant, and it's an acceptance. It's there. It was one of those things. When I was in recruit training, I came from commando forces. I just served operation with the commandos in the first Gulf conflict, and I was promoted to be a physical training instructor in the gyms. So we had 4 platoons, and they go 10 weeks, and each had a physical training instructor, and you could do what you wanted with them at the end of the 10 weeks. There'd be physical endurance tests, speed tests, fitness tests, and my platoon was winning every single one. And I thought, I'm ninja. And then one of the parents on a pass-off parade came up to me and said, oh, my son doesn't stop talking about you. You've really changed his life. And that's when it happened, because it kind of clicked to me. I'd also changed the life of every single recruit that hadn't passed in, that had returned to civilian life. And then I started to dig a bit deeper, and I looked at the numbers, and the numbers in my platoon were often smaller than the other platoons. So I started to think, well, actually, am I just driving them too hard just because the ego for me is to win all the competitions? But actually, I'm not. If people aren't passing in, am I really doing anything? Could anyone do what I'm doing? And it was an instant, right, I need to really start investigating this now. I really started to question why I'm doing these things and what's the purpose of me being here. And I realized actually my success criteria was wrong. It wasn't about winning the competitions. I was there for the recruits, and I was doing them I wasn't presenting the service that I should have. So it was an instant for me. It was, no, I need to do this better. I need to change jobs.
So what I hear you say then, Mark, is that you had an instant realisation that your coaching was about you and not about them.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, because my success criteria was about winning the competitions. It wasn't about helping them pass in, which actually I was there to actually help people develop so they can pass into the British Army. So my success criteria was warping how I was measuring success, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. So we had a little bit of a chat before going on air, because I know that you've done a lot of podcasts, and I know there'll be a lot of listeners who have heard a lot about what you do. And so our challenge today is to present your work in a different light, or bring it to life through different stories. So we're going to try and do that, but we're still going to learn about the core fundamentals and the essential philosophies of your approach. But the way I want to do that is to talk about some of the case studies that you've been involved with. You've been involved with some really fascinating, impactful case studies. So we're going to go through each one. We're going to go on a journey here. We're going to talk about the Cleveland Indians. We're going to come back to the UK and talk about Bath Rugby. We're going to go back over to the States and talk about St. Ignatius baseball. We're going to talk about British basketball, and then Evo soccer, which is based in both Britain and I think in Australia as well. So, hey, we're going to globetrot over the next 50 odd minutes. So that sounds exciting. And on your website, Mark, you've got these wonderful clips that describe from the coaches themselves some of the work that you've been doing with them, some of the brilliant work you've been doing with them. So, and I watched the Cleveland Indians clip, and actually quite early on in the clip, you talk about something you did, which I would see as very brave, very bold, and that was that you actually, even though you don't know anything about baseball, or so you say you don't, that you actually took a session, a baseball session early in your tenure there, perhaps in the first week or couple of weeks. In fact, I think you'd only delivered one presentation. And what came through is that you wanted to, and you can correct me here if I'm wrong with this statement, but you wanted to help the coaches understand that learning is more important than knowledge, or learning is more powerful than knowledge. So why don't you take us through that little episode there?
Yes, first time I'd ever seen baseball. Well, honestly, know nothing about baseball. I've got a better understanding now, but it's a funny thing because I deliberately don't want to find out about the sport and the tech, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Even basketball now, I've been working with, probably 10 years now around basketball, and I really forced myself not to get caught up in the tech, because that's not what it's about for me. It's about all the other stuff. So it allows me to see things clearer. So the reason why I do that, and Cleveland Indians was a great example, is because you're coming into coaches that are very passionate about what they do. They've got a lot of experience. They're doing the best they can with what they have. And you're offering them a different way. Now, that can be really odd for many. Well, hang on a minute. What is this madman coming in for, saying this stuff? Or it sounds great, Mark, but it wouldn't work with my players. No, which I hear quite often in many different sports. So the best way for me to do it is, look, let me just run a session. And let's see if we can shift in a positive way the behaviour of the players, the way they engage, their intensity, their quality, how they interact, how can they accept feedback, how they can find their own solutions. So I do it also as a baseline measure. So what I mean by that is I only know what the players know if we can put them in situations to allow them to express themselves and make decisions and communicate. So in a simple way for me is I bring it back to behaviours first. I just get the players to just decide what the success is for that phase of the session. based on what they know, and then I ask them, could they show me what acceptable, exceptional, unacceptable would be? How are we going to keep that alive? How long could you do that for? They can tell me. And then if you don't, what's our strategy? How can we help each other? So then often if they don't quite get it, I say, well, how about Steve? Could you help Jimmy if you see Jimmy? Yeah, I could do that. Well, how could you do that? Jimmy, if he's reaching out to you, how can he say it's going to be effective? And if he's reaching out to you with intent, are you going to accept it? So, and then they say, yes. So, well, how will I recognize that? Well, we can put our hands up, we can hand touch, great. So you show me that? Fantastic. And then we let them go. So all I'm doing then is I'm scanning based on what they've already told me is success criteria. I look at nothing else. I have the coaches stood next to me and I just say to them, what are you seeing? What are you seeing? Based on now, what have they said success criteria? The acceptable, unacceptable. And I keep them honest with what we're looking for. Okay, how are you seeing here? And every single time we do this, there's two things that happen with the coaches in the reflection afterwards. The first thing they say is, we've never seen the players with the quality of engagement ever in any session. The intensity is through the roof. We've never seen this. And the other thing is, they realise, that they know more than we think, don't they? And it's, yes, they do. So then it opens the doors for the journey of discovery with me. So I see it as two ways. It's one is getting them to realise it's not about throwing information at them. But secondly, it's about them to connect with, this is going to add value to my coaching. Mark's not telling me I'm a bad coach, but it's connecting with me. Maybe I don't have to do as much work as I'm doing. Maybe I don't have to force the pace as much because I'm not actually utilising the players as much as I should do to help them grow. So it's the connectivity is through that. So it's always this case of, so often coaches design a lesson plan, they put so much time and effort into it, and they're forcing the session. They have to bring it alive. They have to force the knowledge. They have to make sure we cover A, B, C, D, and we've got 10 minutes to do this, 15 minutes. But they're forgetting why they're there. And they're also forgetting is, are we developing the capacity in the players to interact, to get the best out of the session? How much can the players do without me? Well, we need to develop an environment to identify that and then not step over the toes of the players, to allow the players to, now we know what you're capable of, players. So now you can earn this every single time, as opposed to some coaches feel they have to motivate the players. They have to get the players to do things. They have to give the players the answers. They have to give the players the solutions, etc., because they're the person with the knowledge. Well, hey, that's not our job. But if we were to go in with coaches and tell them that, the barriers would go up. So I find that way of going, let me run a session that I know nothing about your sport, and then we can share what we see and what we learn from that experience.
You said that coaches are forgetting what they're there for. So what do you feel that coaches are there for?
I suppose it's I've got a little sentence I always give in this, which is kind of my go-to, but it's, my principle is always that a coach should be an influencer, as opposed, so when they say the word coach, for me I see that as an influencer. So my whole principle and belief is a coach whose role should be to make themselves redundant, to in anything that they're working towards, to get the players self-aware, self-managing, be able to scan effectively, make effective decisions, execute with intent, review the choice in the execution live under any type of pressure, unsupervised without need for the coach, and to accept feedback and interact with players to allow them to be the best they can in the moment without the need for the coach. So it's always, if a coach can start thinking that way and say, okay, if that's my aim, in this moment, what's the most effective thing for me to do in this moment if that's my aim? So I think this is where, with the athlete-centered and the sit on the fence, am I athlete-centered, am I coach-led? I think this is where the confusion comes in, because obviously to do that, there will be times when you need to say and tell players, because it could be new skill, it could be, okay, you're not getting anywhere with this, we've given you all the opportunity to discover, coach, we're going nowhere, help us. So there is that, but there's also the time as, do I know when in this moment, I shouldn't be stepping in right now. Now I'm giving the players permission to figure out themselves. I know you already know. I'm backing you. I trust you can do this, and build the confidence in the players. So it's kind of the coach understanding that light and shade of coaching, but always understanding I want to make myself redundant in each moment, in each new skill, in each new tactic tactic, in each new pressure load, my job should be I can get you to a point where you don't need me.
You must experience quite a lot of tension at first from coaches when you're introducing these ideas, even after demonstrating, because we're so socialized in coaching towards this notion of I've got a lot of knowledge and I have to pass on this knowledge, and we're relating that to performance, relating that to outcome if we're competing at that kind of age group where outcome is very relevant. And interestingly, when you watch the Bath rugby video, and I've put down the strap line, sort of put players first, but when you watch the Bath rugby video, one of the coaches is singing your praises, but at the same time acknowledging that, wow, this was hard at the beginning because, I've got a lot of knowledge. I've worked hard to have a lot of knowledge, and I feel I've got to pass on this knowledge. So I suppose my question in all of this is you must get some pushback, Mark. There must be some tension there. There must be some conversation, even some robust debate at times. What can that look like, and how do you manage that?
Well, first of all, if I don't get that pushback, I'm worried.
Okay.
Is the first thing. So I'm looking for that because I need people to start challenging. Okay, so where are the challenges going to be with this? But let's work out the solutions. But there's a value to it. But the application is going to be tough. So the biggest barrier, stage one, the biggest barrier always is, apart from the discussion about how. I think I've got a lot better over the last 10 years in particular of getting people to realise he's not telling me I'm a bad coach. Actually, there's some value to this. This is added to my toolkit. But the biggest challenge is always asking coaches, okay, now you've bought into it, can you film yourself with a camera on the chest? And I'm interested in understanding how you coach, why you coach in the way you do. So would you be prepared to put a camera on the chest so you can hear yourself, you can see the eye contact, the interaction with the players, and I'm just interested in you sitting back and watching that film. And just don't look at the tech. I'm just interested in looking at your interaction, what you say, how you say it, and the reaction of the players and how successful it is, how effective it is. I'm just interested in understanding you. And actually that switched a little bit because when I first were asking people to film themselves, I didn't word it as effectively. So I was just saying, look, can you film yourself? And that will establish our baseline, if you like, of what you're doing well and what you're not. So that in itself is a bit more of a struggle than saying I'm really interested in actually finding out how you coach, your style, why you do the things you do. And actually that's always was what I wanted to understand, because how can you have a dialogue with a coach that you're asking them to change unless you first understand them? So the dialogue of honest, genuine interest in they've gone down a journey, whether it's through habit and just picking up ideas as a player from coach or other coaches without knowing, or they've been through a conscious journey of saying, I want to be like this worked for me, etc., etc. But there must have been a journey that's got them to who they are now and where they are now. So it's about saying, look, this is all about let's start the journey to establish why you coach and how you coach in the way you do. But I'm also, as part of that, as a secondary covert is, I recognise most coaches don't really know how they coach or why they coach, because apart from their last coaching course, they've probably never filmed themselves and just looked at the interaction, not the tech, not looking at the players, just looking at how accurate am I, how I think I'm doing things to actually how I'm doing them. The great example is the difference between so many coaches that are different animals in practice to in game time. Basketball is a great example of that, American football. Some coaches are fantastic at managing their state, or just being in a good state and maybe not managing it, but interacting well, great rapport. And then they get to a game time and they're this destructive animal that is killing the players because now they're not aware or controlling their emotional state, which is negatively influencing, one, what they're scanning for, and secondly, the choices they're making and how they're communicating the choices. So it's kind of getting to the bottom of that first, and that generally is the biggest barrier. Once, after the first discussion of sitting down and reviewing the video with them, the floodgates open. It's just such an empowering experience, and they go, "Wow, this is really good." But it's that step that's the tough step.
What I hear you say, Mark, is that coaches have pasts. they have memories, they have perceptions of what they believe effective coaching looks like, but they don't necessarily sit down and question this, and those questions revolve around, why do I do what I do? How do I do it? And actually, is this optimal? Is this helping? But the optimal and the helping has to start with, why do I do what I do, and how do I do it?
Yeah, and also, how aware am I of what I'm actually doing compared to what I think? And also the trends. I mean, the trends are the big thing. Is, are there certain players or certain types of players or certain situations which you find very easy as a coach, but are there other situations or a type of player that you're really struggling with, and you come up with the barriers? So it's kind of that discovery of self-awareness. And even now, I would refuse to mentor a coach unless they were comfortable and willing to film themselves and evaluate and have that discussion. Because for me, there's two things that happen with this, and this might be hard-nosed, but I just think it's important, is how can you go on a journey of support with a coach unless you've agreed what the baseline looks like? It becomes a very difficult journey if they're just like, okay, so if you're not aware of what you're doing and how you're doing it, every time we get into a discussion, what we see is totally different. So how can we form a journey of agreement and discovery, of challenge and support? So for me, it has to be number one. But unless you're both agreeing even what a great coach looks like to start with, and then, okay, so where are we now? And that awareness process, then it's very difficult to form a foundation of relationship to start any type of journey.
Talking about different coaches, let's take those first two teams, Cleveland Indians, Bath Rugby. Two different types of sports, obviously two different countries. Were there differences between the coaches to begin with? Different sports, different types of coaches. Tell me about the differences that you saw.
It's interesting because there really aren't many. Okay. I'd say the only difference is its subtleties. Cricket, baseball, softball, very similar type sports. There's high loading with certain players, so they definitely cannot pick their best players all the time, because they sometimes play 4, 5, 6 games a week. Whereas rugby is generally, sometimes there'll be 2 a week, but generally it's 1 a week.
Yeah.
But the commonalities are phenomenal. Although one is you stand around, someone hits, someone waits, etc., and the other one's right, interactive, live, we go. But the similarities of a coach, one in their time to practice their part, always connecting with, well, we've got to improve in this area, so we need to include this content. There's so many similarities, and I'd actually say, I think it's been 30 plus sports now, even grass bowls, funnily enough as a sport, is the similarities within the challenges and the barriers the coaches face are pretty identical when it comes, because at the end of the day we're talking about human beings that are interacting with human beings, so contextually most of the problems and challenges they face are pretty much the same.
Interesting. Moving on to, we're sticking with the same sport in baseball, but St. Ignatius. Was that a high school or a college in the States?
So that was a high school. So what I tend to do is, I'm going to a new area, a new sport, with it, like Cleveland Indians, for example, is we find a working model. So the Cleveland Indians, we wanted to really develop an Indians way. So the Indians way was the Indians tech tack with the PDS of the software, if you like.
Yes.
To drive it into the community, to support schools and the inner city, the rough neighbourhoods, to help use sport as a way to develop human beings, to help them grow as people. So the idea was to find a working model that we could develop the process in, so coaches can come and view it. So, okay, so instead of you just listening to this English guy, come and see this team, because they're already living it. You can speak to the coaches, you can speak to the players, you can see it in action. So St. Ignatius was the team that we picked that would be the working model.
And when I watched the St. Ignatius video, What I took away, look, there's loads of messages there, and it's a fantastic video with some brilliant feedback from some of the young players as well as the coaches, which is always interesting to hear. But what I took away from that, the overarching message was everyone is accountable. And I've just put in brackets, including coaches. So everyone is accountable, including coaches. Accountability, that seemed to be a recurring theme throughout the video.
Yes, it's a huge part of my whole passion is if we take ourselves as coaches off pedestals, if indeed we're on them, or we're not on them but the players think we're on them, to get them to realise that we're all on a journey of excellence, we're all human beings, we all have bad days, good days, but actually if we can back each other in pre-agreed behaviours of what that looks like, it's going to help me be the best coach for you and you guys be the best players for each other and to help me, help you, then let's hold each other accountable for that. So the challenge normally is when you start sharing that with some coaches, they're pretty scared of that. So hang on, what you telling a player can challenge me? He says, yeah, on pre-agreed, not on anything. So if you pre-agreed it, what you're saying is that if you're not it's having a negative impact on the session, which will have a negative impact on the journey they're on, whether it's a engagement for young kids or it's high performance results driven. So it's getting them to, okay, what does that look like? How can we make it happen? So that's where that rule of three, where some people just think it's for the players, the rule of three is for the coaches as well. So it's that point of self-awareness first, self-regulation, and then peers that can be coach to coach, but also a player can challenge coach. But importantly, it has to be what's pre-agreed. It has to be driven through the behavior process of what we've agreed, and also we've agreed what it looks like and what's the intervention look like. So an intervention might be a great example is some of them use pineapple as an example of an intervention. So if the coach, for example, is agreed that I talk too much as a coach. So if I'm talking too much and now I'm stopping the session, I'm just talking and throwing information at you and you know what you need to do and go away, just say coach pineapple. And now I have to accept that and go through. But there may be a state process. It may be I'm starting to lose my temper, or I'm now not allowing you to problem solve. I'm stepping in too much. So that can just be like, coach, we've got this. And that's letting coach know, okay, I'll step back. You need to show me now, but I'm stepping back because you've said you've got this. So it's all these little things. So it can't just be the word accountability. It's got to, okay, what's the value? What does it look like? What's it look like for me as a coach, as a player? Where are the permissions? And what's the intervention of the permission? So if you're going to hold me accountable, what do we agree you can do and how can you say it? And what reaction do I need to give you? Is it a hand touch back? Is it a hand up acceptance? So it's really agreeing the details of it that's the important element. And then we got to follow it through every single time.
Interesting. What I hear is integration rather than isolation. And I say that because I suppose in my world as a sports psychologist, I'm thinking mental skills here, and I understand there's behavioural skills mixed in,
yeah.
But mental skills, behavioural skills, they run hand in hand. But there's an integration into the session, and the integration is between everybody, rather than the isolation of, I think this player's got a challenge psychologically, or we're going to isolate this away from the grass area, and we're going to do this in an isolated room. There's integration and there's accountability across everybody. There's a collective accountability. There's an integrated process.
Yes, and it's that. I mean, I use that word interdependency. Is that understanding that we're all turning up for the same goal. We have to see ourselves as family, where, if a family, if you use that analogy, there's real love in the family, but there's going to be some uncomfortable moments. But because I love you, I'm going to embrace those uncomfortable moments, and we're going to get through them together because we're doing it for the right reasons. So for you as a player to allow a coach to be unacceptable once the coach has agreed it is actually unacceptable for you to do, because that's not the type of environment and culture we're developing. The challenge with it all is always looking for the magic moment, looking for the first time, because everyone will be looking at everyone. Okay, who's going to challenge coach first? Okay, what's going to be the reaction? So I preload the coaches, look for that first time, and the first time it happens, make sure you're following through with excellence. Make sure everyone sees that you're backing yourself on what you've agreed you're going to do. So then everyone goes, "Oh wow, coaches living this right now." And the other important thing there, when we started doing St. Ignatius, you probably heard within that video, is once they start getting into that, people are a lot more honest with each other. So where sometimes players were uncomfortable really sharing what they thought about certain things, even if it's a tactical thing or a selection thing or actually I'm uncomfortable with this, I haven't really got it, you're asking me to do something I can't, but I'm not going to say anything to coach. Very quickly, and I'm talking within weeks and maybe a month, that players are saying, "Coach, I don't quite get this," or "Actually, coach, can we go for it a different way?" Or "I don't think this is going to work, coach, for us. Can we try this?" Now, the coach is always in charge, which is the important part, but if you can develop that level of rapport where the fear is gone, where people are understanding why are we here, and for me to be honest, and also the other benefit for that, they start communicating a lot more effectively. I don't know if you noticed on that video with the players, the way they communicated, and Evo Soccer, Evo Rugby, 8, 9, 10, 11-year-old kids that are communicating really effectively, using good language that is expressive, that is detailed, that is specific. So we're now, because of that type rapport and that accountability, the accountability is developing that rapport and that relationship that opens up, that takes away the fear, but actually develops a lot of soft skills along the way.
When you talk about the coach being in charge, I'm thinking the threat, the kind of process you're talking about can be a threat to a coach. It can feel like a loss of power. Yeah. And maybe a coach might talk then about, well, if I lose power, I lose respect. If I lose respect, I lose influence, or a drop in my ability to influence. And you've obviously talked about being an influencer. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a really common one, and it may be that a coach has never experienced the type of environment that we're sharing, that we're talking about. So do they even believe it's possible is the first thing. And I'm in a more comfortable position now because, as you've seen on the video, there's references. We can go, well, have a listen to this guy, etc. And the more you do it, the more stories you have. So the important thing is to get them to recognise, look, if you look at the best coaches in the world, what are they like within their players? Well, actually, they don't have to shout down at them. They don't have to get emotionally to go, look, I'm the man. Because everyone respects them to go, you're here because you have a level of knowledge and understanding, experience that we may not have, so we need you. But actually, we need you to help us work it out for ourselves as well. So it's kind of, if there's ever a 50-50, so there will be when you start doing this, where players can disagree when you're asking players to come up with a solution. There might be two players going, no, it's this. Well, a coach can step in and say, guys, we're going this way. Basketball, a great example, there might be 5 seconds left on the clock, it's a timeout. Whereas in the past, the coach has said, okay, guys, review, what have you got? Okay, so why have they called a timeout? Why are we calling it? Okay, what if this happens? What are we going to do? Great, show me. In that moment, it may be, right, now there's 3-4 seconds left on the clock. Guys, we're going to do this. And because of the rapport and they understand this is a light and shade, everyone listens because coach doesn't often do this. So if coach is doing it, it must be important. And it's breaking down the barriers that actually discipline in the hierarchical scale of, call me sir, I'm in charge, listen, like, the old traditional head teacher, is not actually in real world authoritarian in the respect and the rapport and the relationship you want for honesty, that actually you're not then getting information from the players, you're shutting them down. So actually it makes your job a lot tougher. But actually if you can develop an area where if you're asking a question, you get an honest response. So players understand you want them to figure out, but if you say, guys, we're doing this, and you explain why, they'll always respect you and back you for it. But actually, if you're working on the process that I'm in charge, I'm telling you what to do, you often find that players will not tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear, what you need to hear, which is very different. And then what you get to, when you come into a game time, you're pulling your hair out saying, we've gone through this 100 times, why are they not doing it? Well, because in the past, all you've done in practice is they're doing what you want them to do because they go, well, coach asked me a question. What does coach want me to hear right now? What does coach want me to say? What does coach want me to do? So actually we're shutting the thinking down of the player just because I feel I need to be this authoritarian, which is actually back to what is the purpose of coach. So there's loads of little things in there, but it's getting them to understand, really be comfortable. If you set this up right, people will really value your opinion much more, and they understand if there is a 50-50 and you make a decision, they'll support you on it.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I was thinking there that coaches will talk a lot or instruct a lot because it helps them feel better. They feel they're getting over their coaching point. They feel they're doing their job. I suppose which comes back to the definition of coaching. But I'm getting over my point. I'm doing my job. That's all I can do. I can't do any more. And so it almost gives them the opportunity to forgive themselves if the players can't grasp what they want them to learn.
Yeah, it's shifting, isn't it, in that purpose of, if our aim is to make ourselves redundant so that in a game they can do it, they can scan, they can make great choices with confidence and commit to them. If that's what we want to do in the game time, I don't know any coach would say that's not what they want in a game. So we say, okay, so if that's what it looks like in the game, what does practice need to look like? Because if you're the one telling them what to do and giving them all the solutions and the problems, when in practice, can they develop the very skills that you want them to do in a game? And straight away I say, well, I'm not. Okay, so how could you? And we're back to understanding. Think about the different, and it's back to, sometimes it's understanding meaning to words, right? So sometimes it's, okay, you talk about teaching. So what's your understanding of learning? What's the difference between teaching and learning in a practical environment? What would learning look like? What could teaching look like? So, well, actually, if I'm telling them I'm teaching them, okay, so if that's teaching, what's learning? Well, they learn it. Okay, so what does that look like? And how do we know the difference between short-term and long-term learning? Oh, I haven't really thought about that. So it's kind of getting them to understand, if the players are thinking less than the coach, are we preparing them for the time when they're going to have to do all the thinking?
I absolutely 100% agree. There seems to be this thing through sport, you've used this word thinking, and I believe a lot of coaches would argue or might say to you, okay, Mark, that's nice, but I don't want my players to think when they're competing. I just want them to do. I want them to let go and do, and we've got terms like being in the zone and flow that might relate to that notion. But what I hear you say is actually, under the gun, you do want your players thinking. You do want them to think because you want them to play the game that's in front of them, to be adaptable, to be able to meet those challenges. Would I be right in saying that?
Yes, and it's back to understanding, when we use the word thinking, what does that look like in real game time? So if you're looking at soccer or rugby, basketball, netball, all these types of sports, it's a fast live game. You're interacting with the opposition. So when we talk about thinking, we're not talking about someone stood still and frozen and go, oh my God, what should I do here? Let me work this out. But what we are saying is, you need to be able to scan, okay, where are the opportunities, where are the threats? This is thinking. Okay, opportunity there, I see a guy coming around, so I'm going to be watching him, where could the ball from? Where's my passing lane? Right, I'm ready for this, I'm ready. I'm backing myself on flowing. That's thinking, but it's actually thinking in flow. It's okay, I'm in the moment. I know what I'm looking for. I'm collating the data to allow me to make an effective decision and commit to it. So it's back to, when people say words, which is great, you've picked that up, is when we say that thinking, do we understand what that looks like for a player? What would be restrictive and what would be empowering?
It's thinking in action. It's thinking in action, and it's a big issue I personally have with the perhaps the misunderstanding of the flow literature, and the just do it philosophy, that actually that couldn't be further from the truth. And you're talking about scanning, and in sports psychology theory we might talk about, horrible term, but visual exploratory behaviours. Scanning sounds much better, Mark, but visual exploratory behaviours where you're constantly, and actually that has great links to focus of attention. If I'm constantly scanning, I'm giving myself a task to constantly scan, so I'm going to stay switched on. But as you say, constantly scanning is thinking. And it's and that state of readiness or activation, as we might say. And I have a technique called a game face that relates to this. I'm in my state of readiness, I'm activated, I'm going to exploit the opportunities that I see from scanning.
Yeah, and if you think about a great example in when that doesn't happen well is, and you see it even at top level football, rugby, is you've got a guy now or a woman that stood there, they haven't got the ball at the moment, and they're in a bit of a daydream. Or they could be in a negative spiral, or I just missed that, or we're 5 behind, whatever it is. They're not scanning. So the first time they start attempting to make a decision about where are their options is when the ball is coming to them. And all of a sudden now they're going, right, now I've got the ball, do I pass, do I kick, do I, what do I run with it, what do I do? And now I'm having to think and make a decision. Whereas actually, if you've scanned, you go, right, okay, where am I opportunity stretch, right? I'm ready, ball's coming, you've already got the data, you can make a clear decision and go with it. And it's that understanding of actually when you're doing that, you are in the moment, but you're getting the data you need. So when you do need to make a decision, you've already done most of the hard work already. So actually it's an instant, effective choice you've executed.
I know a lot of your work, and we've used some words related to this, and you've talked a little bit about this already, but I know a lot of your work is about being adaptable in the moment, and that's very much what came through with the British basketball video from Alan Keane, the under-18s British basketball coach. What kinds of things did you do with British basketball to help our under-18 players become more adaptable in the moment?
Yeah, so that's huge. Basketball is probably one of the fastest sports on the planet when it comes to team sports interaction, very similar to netball in that way. It's the traditional sport that's very much based on plays, sets of plays, in defence, in zone, in marking. We're actually in the real world, hardly any of them really come off. It's a shape, but actually it's that interaction of adaptability, that transition, what's happening in front of me, where can I go, the speed of... People call it reaction, but actually it's quite proactive because you already looked and scanned for the opportunities. So a great example is Alan does this now in pre-season when he gets a new team in, and I advocate anyone to do this as a little adventure, if you like, of discovery, is you just have 2 whiteboards at the end, and you've got the names of the opposition on the whiteboard, or the numbers if you don't know them yet, and they put bibs on them, and you get them to play for 3-4 minutes. And all you're asking the team is to do is, I want you to identify the strengths and weaknesses in the opposition. And after 3 minutes, you come back and you write them on the board. Then you strategize. What's your strategy? And then you send them out again. Then you send them out for 2-3 minutes, come back, go, were you successful in your strategy? And straight away, a few things are happening here. One, now they're having to look and actually suss people out. They can't just play. But secondly, they'll start coming back to the board and go, oh no, our strategy didn't work because the opposition did this. So what do you need to do? Well, we need to adapt. Okay, so what do you need to be ready for? So if they do this, we do this. Okay, great. So now you're coming up with solutions to what ifs, but what can you actually do? Do you have the confidence to do this? What can you do? So very quickly you're getting players now to start really adapting live and not go, well, we have to do this play and the opposition's now changed and oh my God, it's not working. I've got to keep doing this play until we have a timeout and coach tells us to do something different. I mean, how many times have we seen that even at high level in some sports? I'd suggest England football does a bit of that sometimes where they can't change live. They're waiting for something to happen. So then it's using practice all the time and I'm not a negative on drills, by the way. I think that's a misinterpretation of that word. We could have an hour on what drills are, what they're not. But if we're thinking about practice, there may be a time when you have to work some shape, which you could call a drill, but we can put some decision making in it. But there has to be times in play where we're splitting them and we're taking the opposition and go, okay, so Stevie, what's Stevie weak at? How can we wind Stevie up? Okay, that's your task. Off you go and let them at it. So now, and we do that with both teams. So we're forcing them to actually start to realise in the moment, I've got to be aware of what the opposition and what my team is doing and how can I adapt. And we do that, every single week, Alan is doing that in a practice, in zones of phases of every single session, because he understands the importance of it. But it's not mayhem. There's real intent to it. There's a success criteria to it. So the idea is we make it as easy as we can for the players to understand what our focus is, to allow them to commit to the the success criteria. I think what often happens is where people get a bit confused with this is they put too many caveats in place, too many things, and then they let the players out, and the players are just confused. So you just have ineffective mayhem, and they learn nothing from it. They don't develop from it, which is a very different scenario, isn't it?
Absolutely, and what I like about what you're saying, so let's just take this word of adaptability, which could be construed as a psychological word, if you like, the capacity to be adaptable. You're bringing it into activities through a process, and you can play any kind of game. You can do any kind of. I mean, if I was to borrow from the world of soccer, the world of football, we could be doing a small-sided game, a keep ball game, which coaches have their players play. But we can bring this word adaptability into it, and we can actually create a challenge, a specific challenge that's related to players having to be adaptable, so that there's actually a process in place to help the psychological mechanism of adaptability, which I love, because for me, and I'm thinking of soccer, football here, but I would imagine it's quite rife within a lot of team invasion sports, Mark, is that what we just train. We do our small-sided game, or we do our keep ball game, and that's what we're doing, and that's great, and everyone's getting better, and that's what we're here for. But actually taking a specific topic in psychology, such as adaptability or resilience or anything like that, and actually saying, right, we are going to put a process in place that is going to test our players, that is going to hold them accountable to help each other deal with situations. That's an absolutely crucial training protocol to get the players engaged in.
And also, it's really measuring is what you're doing in that moment getting a positive transfer. So sometimes what we end up doing is we might do a great segment there, but then we may move on to something else. Then they may go into an open play at the end, which often happens in football. They do an open play at the end. But what the coaches aren't scanning for is, okay, this work we've just done, are we seeing any shifts, positive shifts? Or are they just forgetting it all and now just doing what they did before? Because now we're missing the whole point. We're ticking a box, but actually we're saying, what impact does that have? If it's having no impact, where's our intervention right now as a coach? It may be just stopping the session quickly and go, remind me what we just did, guys. Okay, so what would that look like in this moment? Show me. Could be a 10-second stop. So that the players are understanding there's a reason for doing this, but we've got to, if it's not yet ingrained, we've got to put it to the front of our head and go, right, I'm going to keep this alive right now. So it can't just be left. Okay, coach, what's next? What's next? And so we end up, instead of building a beautiful cake, we're just hanging up this bunch of different bottles of ingredients that never come together, that never give us this great cake. So it's kind of coaches really recognizing, if I'm working on something here, how am I measuring the success of it? Not in outcome, in results, but actually if I'm moving into something else, has anything transferred positively? And if I'm going into open play, what's my expectation and what the player's expectation that we can take this and place it into here?
And what you're saying there actually is a neat segue into the final case study, which is with Evo Soccer. I think there's Evo Rugby as well. And what I got out of this video was reflection and review, and the importance that you place on reflection and review, and your insistence on coaches and players engaging in a process of reflection and review.
Yes, I mean, shall we take golf as a great analogy of this, and then put it into normal sport? So in golf for many years, the pre-shot routine has been huge, isn't it?
Yep.
So, we work, and a lot of the time coaches go on pre-shot routine. When I was working in golf maybe 10, 12 years ago now, no one mentioned post-shot routine. It was only pre-shot routine. So we were ending up with players that actually were making often emotionally led or ineffective conclusions to a shot based on where the ball went, and it was eating them up walking to the next shot because they didn't have any type of, whether we call it an experiential learning, but a way of objective reflection based on the choice and the execution, and having clear conclusion, closure, bang. What have I learned from it? What am I taking from it? Okay, move on. So if we took that into sport and the first time it happened, when you have those negative light bulb moments in the past where you go, well, this isn't good. It was with Warrington Wolves, the Super League team. So Lee Briers, only just retired now. He's a Wales international. I think he only retired a couple of years ago. And he was a great player that if he was playing well, he was phenomenal. But if something went wrong, i.e. he missed a tackle or he felt he did something wrong, he'd go into a negative spiral and it would end up looking like he was really sulking on the pitch and he'd underperform to a point sometimes they would bring him off. And he would do the same in training. And that was, I think, in 99 or 2000. It was kind of, whoa, we need to be doing something here. And I know within adventurous training in the military, they were doing a lot with experiential learning and people are trying K2, Everest, where, you know, if you make a decision, commit to it, you've really got to look at, okay, was it the right choice? How was the execution? Okay, execution was great. It was just a choice. Great, done. No problem. We move on. So it was getting them, can we develop a simple way where we can do that with players live in football, in rugby, in anything, where it's in a live fast sport, where it's instant, it's quick, it's not overthinking, but actually we're getting them to realise, I'm still playing well, but next time it's this choice. Or actually the choice was great, I nailed it, but it didn't come off great, but I wouldn't change it. So it's allowing them to understand. And back to the adaptivity, if we're not getting them to effectively conclude live, then they may not be learning and adapting because they may not have made the connection with, actually, it was the right choice, I just didn't commit to it. Or in this situation, I'm playing well, I'm committing, my execution is great, it was the wrong choice. So next time I'm ready for that. And it may be, I've now sussed this player is doing something different than our scouting was. Well, now I recognise that, next time I'll be ready for it. So it was just a way to get players. And you've seen with the Evo Soccer, even the video clips I've now put on YouTube, is the other benefit to it is you don't have to stop the whole of session of practice. If you see a player now they're all doing this live without thinking. It's just bang, bang, bang. If you use that flow, I know they're still thinking, but it's not overthinking. Because they're doing it all the time, you'll see one of the video clips. So instead of stopping the whole play, the coach can just shout the player. Two things can happen. He can either just put his hand or thumb up and give the coach conclusion and keep running, and the coach's thumbs up, great. I now know what you were thinking and why you did it, great, I don't have to pull you in. Or I want to find out more, just pull that player to the side and just go, okay, just review that. And without the player just looking at you blank, hoping the coach is going to give them an answer if they're silent for long enough, they go straight into, okay, this is what happened, this is what I saw, this is what I did. Next time, either I nailed it, wouldn't change a thing, or next time I'm going to do this. And straight away, the coach is just now listening, go, great. You haven't just worked that out now. You've already worked it out because you're just flowing with it in this split second I've just asked you. So that's telling me you've already worked it out live. You're not having to stand here now and go, oh, let me think about that, coach. Can you help me with this? So if we can get players to do that, it's just that growth of allowing them to adapt live with confidence on the pitch when they're playing, when they're practicing. And also then backing each other if someone's getting it wrong to recognise and support them as a fellow peer on the pitch. So I just think that being able to self-evaluate live is so powerful and so confidence building. And also it allows the coaches to understand, I now know that player doesn't understand something, not a problem. His attitude and his intent is brilliant, but there's a lack of understanding. Let me help you with the understanding. Or can I link you up with Steve? Steve, the other player, can you help Jimmy with the understanding? Because now I recognise where the problem is.
My last question, Mark. What about your own growth? When you reflect back, what's been your biggest area of growth over the last 20 years or so?
I'd say there's two areas. I'm more accepting of pre-agreeing acceptable, unacceptable with all my clients. So I had really high standards in the past. So I had an expectation that everyone would be pursuing the same level of standards as I have, and obviously that's not always the case, and you get frustrated. So one is now I'm really comfortable at it. Let's agree where you are right now, which may change in 3 months, but where you are now, let's agree what that is, and then we go, okay, now we agree, that's fine. And the other thing that's really been my evolution is I'm far better at allowing people to do it their way. So the whole point with PDS was initially to help people, but early on it was, well, you need to do this, because if you do this, you're going to get great results. So if someone was going, well, I'll do it my way, Mark, and you're kind of, it's not. You sometimes go, well, yeah, but you're not going to get in the same result. So now I'm a lot more comfortable with saying, okay, so quantify why you're doing those things. Great. Flow. Come up with your own version. Call it something else. So long as everyone knows what that meaning is, you can call anything you want. It can be totally different. So long as you're understanding why you're doing it and you're measuring the success of how effective, and you can evaluate it. So I think I wouldn't say I've calmed over time, but I'm a lot clearer on pre-agreeing things, even if it's not the way I would do it, is really being really enthusiastic when someone actually comes up with a different way, as opposed to in the past I might have been a bit uncomfortable that they've come up with a different way. So it's been quite a paradigm shift for me in that way.
So I'm hearing the word adaptable there. You've become more adaptable.
I'm certainly living the system.
Which we all should do as consultants and practitioners, right? Well, Mark, what a fantastic conversation, and I know everyone will have enjoyed that, whether they've heard you before or not. Now, I know it's going to tap some interest, so how can people find you? Do you use social media? How can people get in contact?
So Twitter is PDS Coach, Papa Delta Sierra, in the funny letters. Website is PDS Coach, and I've just set up YouTube. Well, it's been around for years, but I've started to download videos, and you can link through. It just comes up on Mark Bennett MBE, but I'll share most of my updates through Twitter, but on the website there is the masterclasses I run in Sheffield and Reading now. So you'll see Alan Keane live and Evo Soccer doing live sessions, so you'll see the players ingrained, but also the online mentoring, but the full interventions where I can go to a team and support them direct, and then we set up the Skypes, etc., with the clients abroad. We do the same thing. So there's lots of variables now for support, but yeah, they're the main streams.
Fantastic. Well, mate, I've really enjoyed that conversation. So thanks so much for coming on the Sports Psych Show.
Oh no, it's been a pleasure. I mean, I hope somebody's got at least one element for that which can add value to their coaching.
I've no doubts they have, and I certainly have, and I hope everybody out there, the Sports Psych Show audience, enjoyed that podcast. I'd love to hear what you think, so please do get in touch via Twitter or Facebook or through my website, danabrahams.com, to tell me exactly what you think of the Sports Psych Show, and if you do have any suggestions, I'd be delighted to hear them. I'm really looking forward to next week's episode. Bye for now.